His Excellency Dr. Mustafa Siddiqui Kaloko, Commissioner for Social Affairs of the African Union Commission, Professor Benyan David Mansour, Chairperson of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, and second Vice Chairperson of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, His Excellency Professor Marta Santos Pais, the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General on Violence Against Children, dear distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As Chair of the International Board of Trustees of the African Child Policy Forum, I extend my warm welcome to you all on the occasion of the launch of the African Report on the Violence Against Children. Let me begin by acknowledging those who have made this report possible. First, I extend my appreciation to the African Child Policy Forum for their courage in preparing this important publication. It is surely a commendable initiative, but I am aware that this achievement would not have been possible without the support from many others. I would, in particular, like to acknowledge the contributions and leadership demonstrated by both the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Children and the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General on Violence Against Children, Professor Marta Santos Pais, for supporting the preparation of the report. Equally importantly, I would like to acknowledge the leadership demonstrated by the African Union. The fact that this report is being hosted by the African Union is a reflection of the commitment of the African Union, specifically the Social Affairs Commission, on recognition and addressing children's well-being, including protection from violence, as a priority. Finally, I wish to express our gratitude to Plan Sweden, Plan Norway, and the Oak Foundation for their generous financial support. Ladies and gentlemen, this report, the African Report on Violence Against Children, is the first comprehensive analysis of violence against children in Africa. It comes at a time when the child rights community is taking stock of the progress made in advancing child rights 25 years since the adoption of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child and the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. This report is an important contribution to these efforts. It is a stark reminder of the extent, nature, and depth of violence that occurs across the continent. Simply put, we cannot be complacent, and we collectively must scale up our efforts towards eliminating all violence against children. Ladies and gentlemen, understanding and documenting the evidence of the scale of the problem of violence committed against children in Africa has been a priority. Despite the challenges, ACPF has made a commendable effort to do so. The report not only provides the evidence objectively, using primary data collected in a number of African countries and in different contexts, but it also highlights the experiences and perspectives of children themselves. The report draws attention to the violence experienced by those children who are especially vulnerable and often invisible, children with disabilities, and children living on the streets. The report is not only comprised of statistics, but aims to go further to describe the complex web of community values and socio-cultural factors that impact on a child's upbringing and protection. It shows us that many of these beliefs and practices can protect the children from violence, but also, in some situations, may even expose the child to violence. The report acknowledges the evidence of national government-led surveys undertaken. Clearly, in short, we have the evidence, and now, more than ever, we have obligations to act and respond. Ladies and gentlemen, the report is rich and deserves deep reflection. It is not my role to provide a detailed description of the findings, but I would like to highlight a few specifics that I believe deserve attention. Children in Africa commonly experience physical and sexual violence within their communities and within their schools. For example, about 70% of children in Uganda and 50% in Ethiopia, Mali, and Zambia experienced physical violence outside their home at least once during 2012. Violence in schools is widespread across Africa. Schools are not safe havens for our children, but rather places where violence is frequently inflicted on children. For example, 40% of children surveyed in Uganda who experienced physical violence were beaten by teachers. In Gambia, 30% of teachers reported beating their pupils very often. In Sierra Leone, nearly 66% of schoolgirls reported having experienced at least one form of sexual violence at school, and 30% of reported rape incidents took place in the context of schools. Children are not immune from violence in their own homes. Disciplinary measures undertaken at home by parents, relatives, or guardians are often conducted violently. For example, 6% of children aged 11 to 17 years in Zambia, Morocco, and Uganda, and 50% in Mali and Ethiopia surveyed reported having experienced at least one form of physical punishment at the hands of parents or close family members. The intergenerational impact of violence in the home is not to be underestimated, as it might lead to children internalizing and normalizing violent attitudes and values. Children, especially girls, in Africa are vulnerable to new and emerging forms of sexual violence and exploitation in the continent. We have evidence to show that children today are exposed to sex tourism, child pornography, and other forms of virtual risk. As Africa continues to recognize the immense benefits of better and more widespread internet access, we must urgently acknowledge these significant risks that have emerged. The lack of appropriate laws and law enforcement, corruption, apathy, and the prevalence of adult sex tourism and increasing demand for child pornography have contributed to the proliferation of this worst form of child exploitation. We need to pay attention. Our children in Africa are often bullied and exposed to some form for mental violence. Mental violence including insults, emotional threats, and bullying, which is widely underreported in general, has been highlighted in the report. About half of children surveyed in Ethiopia and 3/4 of children in Morocco and Zambia, respectively, reported having experienced the mental violence of one form or another. The self-esteem of those children affected by such violence will surely be undermined. Some forms of violence perpetrated against children are justified on the basis of social, cultural, and religious grounds. Some of these practices, such as rites of passage, mark the transition from childhood to adulthood, while others, however, are inappropriately abusive, exposing children to physical, psychological, and emotional harm, and severely compromising their bodily and mental integrity. For example, female genital cutting is practiced in about 28 African countries, having a prevalence rate of 80 to 90% in some countries. And finally, some of our most vulnerable children, those living on the street or in residential homes, are at even higher risk of violence. The report shows that a large number of children in Africa are especially vulnerable to violence due to a range of factors, including their poor socioeconomic status, a lack of adequate parental care or complete abandonment, disability, stigma, and lack of special protection services. The report shows that about 90% of children living and or working on the street in Kenya, 87% in Ethiopia, 76% in Uganda, and about 74% in Malawi had suffered physical violence, mostly severe. More than 43% of boys under residential care in Malawi had suffered physical violence. In Africa, 9 out of 10 children, domestic workers, are girls. Child domestic work is defined by the ILO as a worst form of child labor. On average, children with disability in Cameroon, Ethiopia, Senegal, Uganda, and Zambia are nearly twice as likely to suffer abuse as their non-disabled peers. Ladies and gentlemen, the African report of violence against children shows us that too many children are suffering from violence in Africa. The statistics are stark and unacceptable. This leads us to the question, what is being done and what can we do more to prevent and respond to a problem of violence of such scale and severity? The report does highlight some of the noble and extensive efforts that are being undertaken already in Africa. These include legislative reforms to ban sexual violence and harmful traditional practices, and to harmonize the minimum age of marriage and employment with the international standards. Many countries have put in place child protection programs, including child helpliness and one-stop centers for child victims of abuse. Coverage of birth registration services is increasing in many countries, while in some countries, social protection schemes are being designed in order to address children's vulnerability to violence. Some countries have attempted to capitalize on customary justice resources in child protection, such as creating village child welfare committees, while others have launched widespread campaigns to combat harmful traditional practices such as FGM and child marriage. The report also tries to answer the question of why the problem of violence still persists despite the proliferation of child protection services. The report identifies 4 main underlying reasons. Child protection is still not a political priority for many governments. Child protection responses continue to be fragmented across sectors and actors. In particular, the important role that families and communities have in protecting their children is adequately reflected in responses. Responses have largely focused on treatment and response rather than prevention and recognition of the structural root causes of violence. Child protection across Africa continues to be constrained by capacity in terms of enforcement of policy, implementation, funding, and human resources expertise. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of these persistent challenges, the report identifies 3 clear priorities for action. Child protection must be an integral component of national development planning to ensure that it is given the political commitment that will result in necessary budgets and national institutional structures and mechanisms. Prevention of violence must be given greater priority. The underlying causes of violence must be recognized and addressed. Policies and programs that enhance the capacity of families and communities must be central in these prevention efforts. Effective and comprehensive child protection systems must be established in many more countries as a means to facilitate greater intersectoral collaboration, build on informal child protection measures, and place emphasis on both prevention and response services. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have the evidence that too many children in Africa suffer from violence. We know that the challenge to prevent and eliminate violence is immense. Yet, we also have greater consensus now on how to move forward. We also know that violence in whatever form is unacceptable and cannot be justified on cultural or religious grounds whatsoever. Therefore, it is our duty, individually or collectively, to act to create an Africa that is safe for its children, and a continent where the freedoms and dignity of children are fully respected and protected. This African report on violence against children is an important contribution, and I humbly present the report to be shared, reflected on, and used by all who are committed to creating societies where Africa's children can live and prosper free from fear of violence.